December 6th, 1944. The wind over the Great Plains carried the scent of snow and distant machinery. Below, a convoy of olive-green trucks wound its way through frozen fields, their engines humming in disciplined unison. Above them, a grey sky hung low, colourless, heavy, vast. Inside one of those trucks sat 24 young women, German prisoners of war. The canvas walls trembled with each gust of wind, rattling like thin skin stretched over bone. The women huddled together for warmth, their wool coats mismatched, some still bearing fragments of Luftwaffe insignia, others stripped bare. Their faces were pale with cold and disbelief. They had left Italy 3 weeks earlier, captured nurses, typists, translators, clerks. None had ever expected to cross an ocean. Most still couldn't quite believe they were in America. The journey had blurred into a single endless motion. Train to port, ship to New York, then another train through landscapes that seemed too vast, too indifferent. Lieselotte Weber, 23, from Hamburg, sat near the truck's rear, her gloved hands clasped around a small metal cup. The water inside had frozen to slush. She looked through a gap in the canvas flap and saw the horizon unfold, miles of white fields interrupted by a few leafless trees, the roofs of barns, the occasional church steeple. It was a world she had never imagined, immense, quiet, unscarred by war, no craters, no rubble, no ruins. The guard opposite her, a young American corporal, sat stiffly, his rifle resting between his knees. His face was expressionless, eyes fixed on the frozen road ahead. Lieselotte could not decide whether his silence came from contempt or courtesy. Beside her, Martha Schiller, a nurse from Munich, with hands always slightly trembling from exhaustion, whispered, "It looks peaceful here." Lieselotte didn't answer. She had learned, since capture, that peace was a dangerous illusion. The truck jolted over a rut. Someone muttered a prayer. Another woman began to hum under her breath, a habit picked up to keep fear at bay. The melody was faint, almost childish, Stille Nacht. The sound seemed to dissolve into the wind. Then, suddenly, the convoy slowed. The engine noise dropped to an idle hum. The women leaned forward, craning to see. Through the narrow gap, Lieselotte glimpsed a wooden sign by the roadside. Camp Algona, U.S. Army Prisoner of War Facility. It was not what she expected. The camp stretched across a flat expanse bordered by pine trees and barbed wire. Yet the barbed wire was orderly, the gates freshly painted. The barracks were white, neatly lined, roofs dusted with snow. Smoke rose from chimneys, real smoke, thick and grey, smelling faintly of coal and something warmer, domestic. When the truck came to a halt, the guard unlatched the back and motioned for them to step out. One by one the women descended, boots crunching against the snow. Their breaths came invisible. Clouds. The air smelled of frost and sawdust. A tall American officer waited near the gate. His face was calm, impersonal, as though carved from the same cold air. "Welcome to Camp Algona," he said, his accent flat and precise. "You will be processed and assigned quarters. Follow instructions. No one will harm you here if you follow the rules." The last sentence lingered oddly. "No one will harm you here." As if he knew what they had been told, what they had feared. Lieselotte's pulse quickened. For months their propaganda had drawn the Americans as monsters, men who mutilated prisoners, who shot women on sight. Yet these men did not even look at them with anger, only with distant efficiency. Inside the gate, the women were guided through a large wooden building that smelled of disinfectant and coffee. They were registered, deloused, given new clothing marked PW. Some flinched at the first touch of American nurses, not from pain, but from confusion. The nurses spoke softly, their hands brisk but not cruel. When it was her turn, Lieselotte stood still as a young medic examined her hands. "Frostbite?" he asked. She hesitated, unsure if he was mocking her, but his tone was neutral, almost concerned. "You'll want to warm those," he added, handing her a tin mug of steaming water. The heat startled her fingers. For a moment, she wanted to cry. She did not. Outside, the women were led to their barracks, long, narrow buildings with small windows rimmed in ice. Inside, the air was warm. Blankets were folded neatly on each bunk. There were even small stoves. Someone whispered, "It's cleaner than home." That night, when the lights went out and the wind swept through the camp fences, Liselotte lay awake, staring at the ceiling beams. The wooden boards glowed faintly in the light of the stove. Around her, the other women breathed quietly, some already asleep, others whispering in the dark. She thought of Hamburg, of sirens, of nights spent in basements as the city burned. She thought of her mother's kitchen, of the smell of coffee made from barley, and she thought of the American nurse's calm eyes, the strange warmth of her hand. How could captivity feel safer than home? In her mind, the war began to lose its shape, the clear lines of enemy and victim, of right and wrong, smudging into something she could no longer name. Outside, the American flag fluttered above the barracks, bright against the grey. It did not look like victory. It looked like distance, and somewhere, deep beneath the frozen soil of Iowa, the first seeds of dissonance, of quiet, unsettling gratitude, began to take root. December 9th, 1944. 3 days had passed since their arrival, yet the women still moved through Camp Algona as if inside a dream, too neat to be real. The snow no longer startled them, but the silence did. Silence, not of fear, but of order. Each morning began with the clang of a bell at 6 a.m., followed by a line-up in the frosted courtyard. The American guards called their names, not shouted, not barked, simply read them from a list. Their voices were measured, bureaucratic, stripped of emotion. The absence of hatred was its own kind of bewilderment. The women had expected filth. They had seen photographs, or so they were told, of Allied camps filled with barbed wire, mud and cruelty. But here, even the ground beneath their boots was swept clean. Snow was shoveled into neat ridges along the paths. The windows of the administration building gleamed like glass in a hospital. When they were assigned work duties, Liselotte found herself in the laundry. The room smelled of starch and soap, warm steam rising in slow clouds. For hours, she and Marta scrubbed, wrung, and folded army linens under the supervision of a quiet American sergeant who offered no more than a nod for instruction. He never shouted. He never touched them. He simply worked alongside them, his movements steady and practical. At first, Liselotte mistook this for indifference, but as days passed, she began to sense something stranger, an expectation of mutual respect, as if within these wooden walls war did not fully apply. In the evenings, they ate in the mess hall, long tables, tin trays, smells of beans, butter, and sometimes, astonishingly, coffee. Real coffee. The first time Liselotte tasted it, she nearly laughed. It was bitter, strong, almost too sharp. She held the cup to her face just to inhale the steam, eyes closing for a heartbeat. "Do you think they mean to confuse us?" Marta whispered one night, her spoon hovering above a plate of mashed potatoes. Liselotte looked around. The guards at the far end were eating the same food. "If so," she murmured, "they are doing it well." The women's days followed a rhythm that felt both mechanical and strangely humane. Work, meal, walks within the fenced perimeter, letters when permitted, everything accounted for, every movement orderly. Yet beneath the discipline, something unspoken began to stir, a quiet, unresolvable unease. It was not fear of punishment, it was fear of comfort. The comfort made them question what they had believed. Could one hate an enemy who offered warmth, food, and dignity? Could one despise a man who held the door open for you? In the barracks, conversations turned inward. Some women dismissed the Americans as manipulative. "They want to make us soft," one said. "They want us to forget we are Germans." Others, usually the quieter ones, said nothing at all, because silence felt safer than admitting that kindness was more disarming than cruelty. Lieselotte tried to remain detached. She cleaned her bunk each morning until it shone, polished her boots, folded her uniform precisely. Cleanliness became her defense, a way to keep her mind anchored in something familiar. Yet even that discipline began to mirror the Americans' habits. The barracks smelled like soap and pine, not sweat and fear. The smell itself became a paradox, purity born of captivity. At night, when the lights dimmed, she often sat by the small stove and listened. There were sounds she had never heard before, a harmonica from the guards' quarters, laughter in English, the distant hum of a generator. Outside, snow fell in slow spirals under the floodlights, glowing as it descended. She thought again of Hamburg, of her mother's kitchen. There, cleanliness had meant survival, scrubbing soot from walls after bombings, washing dishes with rationed water. Here, it was ritual, something that seemed to erase the war from their surroundings, to suspend it just beyond the fence line. One evening, as she was scrubbing a tin cup, a guard passed by the window, paused, and nodded at her. His face was young, barely older than her brother's. For a moment, their eyes met, not as enemies, not as symbols, but as two exhausted human beings trapped in the machinery of nations. Then he moved on. The brief moment unsettled her more than she could explain. It was easier to endure hatred than recognition. Later, in her small notebook, she wrote, "The Americans do not look at us the way we look at them. Their eyes are clean. Maybe that is why I feel dirty." The entry ended there. No reflection, no conclusion. Only the quiet tension of dissonance pressing at the edge of understanding. By mid-December, she noticed that even her dreams had changed. No bombs, no sirens, no flight. Only silence, white barracks, the smell of soap, a dream too clean to belong to war. And when she woke, heart racing, she could not tell whether the dream had been a comfort or a warning. December 14th, 1944. The wind outside Camp Algona had turned sharper, colder, the kind that cut through even the thick wool of their coats. Snowflakes drifted like ash across the wire fences, gathering against the corners of the barracks in small, perfect drifts. Inside, the air smelled faintly of ink, paper, and coal smoke, a smell that, for the first time, felt almost like routine. That morning, a corporal entered the mess hall and announced that the women were permitted to write home. Once a month, 1 page each. The words would be censored, but they could reach Germany. The news spread quickly, quietly, like the whisper of a secret. Lieselotte felt her pulse quicken. A letter, proof that she was still alive, proof that her life had not been erased in transit. Yet as she sat at the long wooden table, the sheet of paper before her looked impossibly white, whiter than snow, whiter than honesty. Around her, the other women hesitated too. The room was filled with the muted scratching of pens, interrupted only by sighs and the creak of benches. The American sergeant overseeing them paced slowly, saying nothing. His silence felt both watchful and merciful. The letters had rules, no mention of camp location, no politics, no descriptions of work or guards, only reassurance, the curated illusion of well-being. Lieselotte began with the formal address, "Meine liebste Mutter." Her hand trembled. What could she say? That she was safe? That she was treated kindly by the people she had been taught to fear? That the war, out here, across the ocean, felt distant, like an echo fading into snow. She wrote carefully, shaping each line with restraint. "We are well cared for. The place is clean, and the food is sufficient. I am working and keeping healthy. Please do not worry." She stopped there, pen hovering. The censor's shadow felt heavy, even without the man himself present. But it wasn't the American sergeant she feared. It was her own conscience, the invisible wall between truth and what could be spoken. She wanted to add, "The guards do not hate us," or "I tasted real coffee," or even, "It is strange to be treated as a person again." But she knew those words would never reach her mother, or worse, might confuse her. Across the table, Marta was biting her lip, whispering her sentences under her breath as she wrote. "Do you think they'll let it through if I say the food is good?" she asked softly. Lieselotte shrugged. "Perhaps write better than expected." "That sounds cautious enough." Marta smirked. "Better than expected," she repeated, a diplomat's phrase. Then, after a pause, "Still, it feels dishonest, doesn't it?" Lieselotte didn't answer. The word dishonest felt too heavy, too dangerous. When they finished, the women signed their names with delicate flourishes, tiny gestures of identity preserved within the machinery of captivity. As the sergeant collected the pages, his hand brushed the edge of Lieselotte's letter. "You wrote in German?" he asked. "Yes," she said quietly. He nodded. "Good. It'll be sent next week." After he left, the women sat in silence for a long moment. The snow tapped softly against the windows. Marta leaned back, exhaling. "Do you think they'll believe us?" Lieselotte folded her hands. "Perhaps not. Perhaps that's better." That night, the barracks glowed faintly from the stove's orange light. The women spoke little. Each seemed to listen inwardly, to the echo of her own words crossing an ocean. In her bunk, Lieselotte replayed her letter in her mind, sentence by sentence. Each phrase seemed hollow, too light for what she felt. How could she explain the contradiction of it? That captivity had given her a strange kind of peace. That she no longer feared death, but instead feared what peace might demand of her understanding. In the dark, she imagined her mother's face as she opened the letter. Relief first, then confusion. Cleanliness, enough food, no hatred. Would she believe it, or think her daughter had been forced to lie? The next morning, the women gathered near the fence for their brief walk. Across the distance, the American guards spoke among themselves in low voices. Their laughter carried faintly through the cold air, human, unguarded, almost gentle. Marta nudged Lieselotte. "They sound like boys," she said. "They are boys," Lieselotte replied. "So are ours." The words startled her. "So are ours." It was the first time she had spoken of the two sides as reflections of each other, rather than opposites. The thought lingered long after the walk ended. That evening, she watched a guard help an older prisoner carry a crate. He said something in English, and though she didn't understand the words, the tone was unmistakable. Respect, or perhaps simply decency. In her diary that night, Lieselotte wrote, "I sent a letter home today. I did not tell the truth. I did not lie either. I wrote only what could be said aloud." She closed the book, placed it beneath her pillow, and lay awake listening to the wind. Somewhere across the Atlantic, a letter would soon arrive. A single page of censored words wrapped around an impossible silence. And in that silence, perhaps, her mother would sense what Lieselotte could not write, that sometimes the enemy's kindness is harder to bear than his cruelty. December 19th, 1944. The camp had begun to breathe with a strange rhythm, one that mimicked peace without ever truly becoming it. Every morning, the same bell. Every meal, the same measured line of footsteps. The women had grown used to the weight of the cold, the metallic clang of the gates, the distant echo of trucks on frozen earth. Time in captivity was not marked by days, but by repetitions. The folding of sheets, the steaming of kettles, the scraping of shovels clearing snow. Yet beneath that repetition, something unspoken was stirring. A whisper carried between glances, between chores, between the rise and fall of breath. Christmas was approaching. No one said it aloud at first. It seemed foolish, almost forbidden, to imagine such a thing here, on enemy soil, behind wire, under an alien flag. But then, one morning, as the women entered the mess hall, they saw it. A single green branch, pine, fresh and fragrant, placed in a tin can near the window. Someone had found it, trimmed it, left it there without explanation. It was not decoration. It was defiance disguised as hope. Lieselotte noticed it immediately. The sight struck her in a place she didn't know was still tender. For a long time she just stood there, staring, until Marta touched her shoulder. "It smells like home," Marta whispered. The guards didn't remove it. They didn't comment either. That somehow made the gesture more profound. Work continued as usual. The women sewed sacks and mended uniforms for soldiers they would never meet. The sound of sewing machines filled the room like low thunder, mechanical, endless. Lieselotte found herself humming softly to keep time. It was the same melody she had hummed on the transport truck weeks ago, Stille Nacht. At first, she did not even realize she was humming it aloud. When she did, she froze, embarrassed. But the American supervisor, a woman this time, red-haired and plain-faced, didn't react. Instead, she nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly, and returned to her ledger. By evening, more voices had joined, humming, then singing, low and hesitant, German words curling through the warm air. Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht. The sound carried into the corridor, up toward the windows, where frost was beginning to form delicate stars. The guards paused outside, listening. One of them, an older man from Kansas, murmured something to his companion. Perhaps recognition of the same melody he had heard in his own church as a boy. The war seemed to fold in on itself for a moment, its edges blurring into something too human to hate. That night, the women sat on their bunks, speaking softly. Rumors drifted through the barracks like wind through tall grass. Someone claimed the Red Cross was sending parcels for Christmas. Small comforts, soap, biscuits, maybe even chocolate. Others laughed. "Chocolate? Here?" "It's America," someone replied. "Maybe they have more than they can eat." Laughter rose, genuine, fragile, almost joyous. It filled the narrow barracks with warmth the stoves could not provide. Lieselotte listened, but said nothing. She didn't want to believe in rumors. Hope, she had learned, was a dangerous currency. In war, it was always counterfeit. Still, that night, she dreamt of her mother again, of the smell of wax candles and pine needles, of a plate of gingerbread cookies cooling on the windowsill. The memory was so vivid, she woke with her hand pressed to her face, as if she could still smell the cinnamon. The next morning, a thin frost coated the inside of the windows. Through it, she saw two guards hanging something on the fence posts near the main gate, small wreaths of pine and ribbon. The ribbons were plain, red cloth strips torn from old supply sacks. But in the pale winter sun, they looked almost beautiful. Marta saw it too. "They're mocking us," she whispered at first. "No," Lieselotte said quietly, "I don't think they are." The camp's rhythm softened. The guards spoke less harshly. One even wished them Merry Christmas in halting German. The women didn't know how to respond. They smiled awkwardly, as if unsure whether to accept the greeting or reject it for decency's sake. In the laundry that afternoon, Lieselotte caught her own reflection in a metal basin. Pale face, dark eyes, a faint trace of color returning to her cheeks from the heat of the steam. She looked healthier than she had in months. That realization unsettled her. The paradox deepened. They were prisoners, yet fed, captives, yet respected. The kindness was not soft. It was firm, structured, almost moral. But it worked its way into them like warmth through cold metal. That evening, as she stepped outside, the air glowed faintly from floodlights reflecting on snow. She stood there for a moment, hands in pockets, watching the light flicker against the wire. Beyond it, she could hear faint singing from the guards' quarters. English words she didn't understand, but a melody she did. Silent night, the same song, two languages, one tune divided by a fence. In her diary, she wrote that night, "The snow makes no sound when it falls, neither does mercy." She closed the notebook, extinguished the lantern, and lay down. The barracks creaked softly in the cold. Somewhere, perhaps miles away, the war was still raging. But here, in this pocket of stillness, something else was taking root. Not peace, not forgiveness, but recognition. December 24th, 1944. The day began brittle and bright, a hard white light skimming off the snow and laying a cold shine over everything, wire, roofs, the black boots lined outside the barracks to dry. The bell rang at 6. The women dressed in silence. Cold tugged at their fingertips, nipped their ears, settled under their ribs like a kept secret. Liselotte pulled on her issued coat, ran a palm down the sleeve to smooth a crease, and followed the line out into the morning. Frost squeaked underfoot. The sky was the color of tin. She tried not to think of churches or candles, of the crackle of paper packages at home, of the way her mother would hum as she moved from stove to table. She tried to keep her mind blank, a clean floor, a folded sheet, a steady breath. The roll call was quick. Names rose and fell in the air like exhalations. Afterward, a corporal gestured to the mess hall. "Inspection," he said, in flat German, and added a word that did not match the day. "Routine." The mess hall smelled of coffee and hot iron. Sunlight sliced through the high windows and fell in pale bars across the tables. The women stood in rows, hands at their sides, breath misting. Liselotte noticed a sprig of pine on the serving counter, tucked into a chipped mug. Someone had tied a threadbare red ribbon around it, a small, homely thing. It made her throat ache. Bootsteps. A young sergeant entered with 2 enlisted men and the red-haired civilian supervisor. He was clean-shaven, his collar turned up against the cold, eyes narrowed, not with suspicion, but with that American kind of practical focus she had come to recognize. He carried a clipboard tucked under one arm, a pencil behind his ear. He didn't bark. He nodded. "You'll receive holiday rations," he said, careful with the German, consonants squared like blocks. "From the Red Cross, small items." He glanced at the clipboard, as if asking it for permission to continue. "We will distribute them by barracks. You'll form a line. No pushing, no trading with guards." A pause. His gaze passed over them, never lingering, never prying. "Frohe Weihnachten," he added, the syllables round and soft in his mouth. "Merry Christmas." It wasn't the words. It was the way the room paused around them, as if the building itself had taken a breath. Someone coughed. Someone else smothered a laugh, startled and small. The sergeant flicked a look at his men. They lifted 3 plain cardboard boxes onto the table nearest the door. Twine held them shut. The cardboard had that particular dull brown of warehouses and basements, of everything utilitarian. A knife whispered. Twine fell. Lids opened. Inside lay an arrangement so modest it looked ceremonial. Small cakes of soap wrapped in paper, handkerchiefs, a stubby pencil, a tin of cocoa no larger than a fist, a few pale, hard candies like frozen rain, and there, amid the folded handkerchiefs, rectangles wrapped in crisp, dark paper. The sight of the bars struck the room like a bell. Not a sound at first, only inhalations, audible and multiple, a collective intake of breath so sudden it felt like the air itself had snapped. The word rose in Liselotte's mind before she could stop it. Chocolate. Not a picture of it. not a rumor, but the thing itself, compact and undeniable. No one moved. The sergeant cleared his throat, as if embarrassed to be the one to break the spell. "Proceed," he said. They did slowly, as if approaching an altar. The first woman took a parcel and stepped back, clutching it with both hands. The second followed. When it was Liselotte's turn, her fingers refused to obey. She stood there, heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her jaw, and reached for the top item. Soap, warm from the crowded box, a pencil, a handkerchief folded into a neat square promise, then the edge of paper against her fingertips, smooth, taut, with that faint glossy give when pressed. The bar. She lifted it, and its weight, small, solid, human, surprised her. "Next," said the sergeant, but gently, as if reminding a child to keep moving. She stepped aside and stared. The paper was dark brown with a thin gold stripe at one end. There was a foreign brand name she did not recognize. It didn't matter. She did not tear it open. She did not even bring it to her nose, though the desire to do so trembled up her arms. She only held it, two-handed, like something that might vanish if not anchored by touch. Marta stood beside her, a twin parcel cradled in her arms. Her eyes were wide and wet. She laughed, a single breath of a laugh that broke halfway like a bone and covered her mouth. "Are those—" The question stalled, absurd on her tongue. "Are those chocolates?" Liselotte nodded, because she could not speak. Distribution continued. The paper rustled like dry leaves. Some women pressed the bars to their lips without unwrapping them. Some stared at the ceiling as if to steady themselves against the fall of feeling. A few began to cry, not loudly, not in spectacle, but in that private, contained way of people who have learned the discipline of silence. The sergeant's face changed then, just a fraction. He looked down at his clipboard, as if it might tell him what to do with the moment he had caused. "If you have complaints," he said, formal again, "report to your barracks monitor. Protocol. A ladder to climb out of whatever this was." The red-haired supervisor stepped forward unexpectedly. "Hot water in the urns," she said in English, gesturing toward the kitchen. Then, in careful German, "For cocoa." A pause. "Slowly. You'll burn your tongues." Her smile was not wide enough to be read as kindness. It was smaller, careful, almost apologetic, like a bandage pressed against a wound you know you cannot heal. Back in the barracks, doors thudded shut against the cold. The stove ticked as it warmed. They laid their parcels on blankets as if arranging relics. No one proposed a feast. No one shouted. Christmas settled over them like the thin wool of their blankets, insufficient and yet, somehow, enough. Liselotte sat on the edge of her bunk, the chocolate balanced on her knees. She turned it over once, twice. The paper had a seam straight down the back, neat as a stitch. She ran a fingernail along it, felt the glue give. The scent lifted, faint but unmistakable. Cocoa and fat, and something almost floral. A ghost of sweetness she remembered from a time before ration cards marked her days. She broke the bar at the seam with a practiced motion learned years ago. The sound, quiet, decisive, filled the small space around her. She placed half in Marta's hand. "Half is enough," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. Marta shook her head. "We will save some," she whispered. "For tomorrow." "For tomorrow," Liselotte repeated, though she understood that the real tomorrow would not be sweetness but newsprint and maps and more months of waiting. Still, tomorrow. They ate 1 square each, small as postage stamps. The taste hit first as memory, then as taste. A soft release, a dark warmth unfurling under the tongue, a sweetness that was not simple but layered. Bitter's shadow at the edges, sugar's brief light in the middle. It was not luxury, it was proof. Around them, the barracks exhaled. Somewhere a woman sang the first line of a carol and could not finish it. Someone else whispered a prayer without the names. The stove ticked. The snow outside came down in needles and ash. Lieselotte closed her eyes. The chocolate melted into everything she had forgotten to allow herself. Childhood, a kitchen table, candle wax, her mother's hands. When she opened her eyes, the room was the same. Boards, stove, bunks, women. But the air had shifted. The gift had done nothing to the war, to history, to the ledger of loss. Yet it had tilted the floor, just slightly, so that the trajectory of hatred slid a finger's width off its line. She wrapped the remaining half-bar in its paper and placed it inside her diary, between pages still blank. She did it gently, as if saving a page from fire. Outside, a guard passed under the window and hesitated. His boots creaked in the cold. He looked up, not to see, but to listen, and then moved on. The light faded to the colour of pewter. Somewhere, a bell rang for evening. Christmas had entered the camp, not with hymns or trees, but with parcels and paper, with soap and pencils, and a taste that said, "You are still human." For a long time, no one spoke. Then Marta, voice small and level, said what all of them had been thinking, what none of them could resolve. "It is harder to hate them like this." Lieselotte did not answer. She set her hand over the diary, as if to steady it, as if the page beneath her palm might move. In the quiet, the day withdrew like a tide, leaving behind a thin line of sweetness on the sand. Narrow, undeniable, shining in the last light. Christmas night, 1944. The camp was silent in the way only deep winter can be, a silence layered upon itself, heavy, muffled, vast. Snow had fallen again, light and steady, until the whole landscape blurred into a soft whiteness. The fences looked like thin pencil lines drawn over blank paper. Inside the barracks, the stove glowed like a small heart. The day's brief brightness had drained away, leaving behind a kind of stillness that neither comforted nor threatened, only existed. The women moved quietly, slow with fatigue, speaking in whispers if they spoke at all. Most of them had saved their chocolate, tucking it under pillows or inside their folded uniforms, as though fearing the gift might dissolve in sleep. Lieselotte sat on her bunk, her diary open on her knees. The candle beside her guttered and flared, stretching her shadow across the wood-panelled wall. From the next bunk, Marta's voice broke the silence, low and thoughtful. "Do you think they meant it? The gift, I mean? Or was it just policy?" Lieselotte considered this. "Does it matter?" Marta shrugged. "Maybe not, but I don't know what to do with it." Neither did Lieselotte. The chocolate lay beside her diary, a half-bar wrapped carefully in its paper, like something sacred and fragile. She hadn't eaten since the first square that afternoon. Her body still remembered the taste, the way sweetness had bloomed, the faint bitterness that followed like a memory you could not keep down. It wasn't the flavor that haunted her. It was the feeling that came with it. For a moment, she had not been a prisoner, not even a German. She had simply been a woman tasting warmth again. The simplicity of it felt indecent. Outside, the wind shifted. Somewhere in the distance, a guard's radio crackled faintly. A burst of music, an American Christmas song, bright and careless. The sound passed through the walls like a ghost from another world. Some of the women turned toward it instinctively, their faces softening, listening. Then the radio faded to static, leaving behind the raw quiet again. The stove popped, and a single ember floated upward, then died mid-air. Lieselotte took up her diary and wrote, "It is not hunger I feel tonight. It is something else. The taste does not leave my mouth, even when I drink water. Perhaps it is not chocolate, but memory." She paused, pen hovering. She realized she did not remember when she had last eaten chocolate before today. Maybe before the bombings began in Hamburg. a small bar her father had brought home, wrapped in tin foil, shared in silence while the radio hummed with news of victories that no longer felt real. She had been 16 then. The memory felt distant, belonging to someone else. The door creaked open. Cold air swept in, carrying a drift of snow. 2 guards stood outside, their lanterns glowing in the night. One of them, the younger one, lifted a hand in greeting. "Lights out soon," he said in slow German, almost apologetically. Marta nodded. "We know." The guard hesitated, then added something in English that Lieselot couldn't quite understand. The tone, though, was unmistakable, gentle, unarmed. Then he tipped his cap and left. After the door closed, Marta whispered, "He wished us good night." Lieselotte looked at her. "How do you know?" "I could see it in his face." The women prepared for bed. Some knelt by their bunks, murmuring prayers. Others lay staring at the ceiling beams, the same as every night, but softer now, as if waiting for a sound that would never come. When the lights dimmed, Lieselot unwrapped the chocolate again. The paper crackled faintly. She broke off a small piece, placed it on her tongue, and closed her eyes. The taste was not joy. It was something older, something that carried both sweetness and guilt. She felt the flavor spread, not across her tongue, but through memory itself. Her mother's voice calling her name, the rumble of trams in Hamburg, the smoke rising from the Elbe after an air raid. The cocoa melted into grief, into recognition. Tears came, quiet and unforced, slipping down her temples. She did not brush them away. The war had demanded so many forms of endurance, fear, hunger, loyalty, but not this. Never tenderness, not toward herself. Marta stirred beside her. "Are you crying?" "No," Lieselot said, though her voice was soft and unconvincing. "You should," Marta murmured. "It's Christmas." They laughed then, a dry, cracked laugh that filled the barracks like the sound of old wood shifting in heat. Outside, the snow kept falling. Lieselot set the wrapper aside and leaned back. The warmth of the stove reached her feet. For the first time in months, she felt her body relax without permission. The chocolate had done nothing to change their circumstance. They were still prisoners. The war still raged. Tomorrow would still be cold. Yet something within the walls had shifted. The fences no longer seemed entirely about power. The guards' eyes, the gifts, the silence, it all seemed to suggest a different truth, that even inside captivity, fragments of grace could still find their way in. She whispered to herself, a line from memory, though she wasn't sure if it came from a prayer or a lullaby. "Nothing that melts is wasted." Then she blew out the candle. The darkness folded around her like cloth, warm and finite. The last thing she tasted before sleep was the ghost of sweetness on her tongue, a sweetness that no longer belonged to the war, but to the fragile, unspoken part of her that refused to die inside it. December 29th, 1944. The snow outside Camp Algona had hardened into a pale crust, brittle underfoot. The sky was a slab of white-grey light, neither day nor dusk, the kind of color that seemed to erase shadows. Inside the barracks, the stove burned low, its small flame laboring against the cold. The Christmas parcels had been emptied days ago, but their presence lingered like an aftertaste, invisible, undeniable. The women spoke little about the gifts. They worked, they ate, they folded, they slept. Yet the quiet between them felt different now, stretched and uncertain, as though some small certainty had been removed. One morning, a notice was read aloud. Another round of letters could be written before the new year. The announcement stirred the same mixture of eagerness and dread as before, that peculiar ache of wanting to reach home while knowing that home was no longer what it had been. Lieselot found herself once again at the long table in the administrative hut, pen poised above paper. She began, as always, with restraint. Meine liebste Mutter, I am still in good health. We are treated correctly. The weather is very cold now, but our barracks are heated. I work daily and am grateful for the routine. Her hand hesitated. The words felt mechanical, obedient. She read them twice and saw nothing of herself in them. No trace of the strange tenderness that had entered her life that week. No echo of the taste that still haunted her tongue. Should she write of it? Should she tell her mother that the Americans, the enemy, had given them chocolate for Christmas? The impulse seemed both innocent and dangerous. Finally she wrote, "On Christmas Eve, they distributed small parcels from the Red Cross. We received soap, handkerchiefs, and even a little chocolate. It reminded me of home." She stopped, uncertain. The sentence looked harmless enough, but beneath it she sensed the tremor, the unspoken suggestion that the world might be more complicated than war allowed. Marta leaned over from the next table. "You're writing about the chocolate, aren't you?" she whispered, eyes glinting with both mischief and caution. "Yes," Liselott admitted. "Why not?" "Because they won't believe you, or they'll think you've gone soft." The word soft stung, not because it was wrong, but because it was true. Liselotte folded her letter carefully when she finished, sealing it with the faintest pressure of her thumb. As she handed it to the guard at the desk, she noticed he didn't even glance at it, just slid it into a pile of identical envelopes to be opened later by some faceless censor. The thought filled her with relief and shame in equal measure. That evening, as the women sat by the stove, the discussion returned. Quiet, circling, inconclusive. "It was only charity," one of them said. "Americans have plenty. They can afford to be generous." "Generous?" another scoffed. "It was a trick, to make us forget." "To forget what?" Marta asked, her voice almost gentle. "That we're prisoners," came the answer. Liselott looked into the stove's red core. The embers pulsed softly, like a slow heartbeat. "Perhaps we are not meant to forget," she said, "only to see differently." The others fell silent. Even Marta watched her, as if hearing something she hadn't expected. Later that night, when the barracks had quieted, Liselott opened her diary again. She slipped the folded chocolate wrapper between 2 pages, smoothing it flat. The paper was fragile now, creased from handling, its faint scent of cocoa fading. She traced the brand name with her fingertip, slowly, as if memorizing it by touch. She wrote beneath it, "They gave us something small, but it is heavier than it looks. I do not know whether it was mercy or a kind of power. Perhaps both. Perhaps mercy is always a form of power." She paused, aware that even thinking such a thing felt dangerous, not to her body, but to the moral scaffolding that had held her together for years. The chocolate had melted. The moment had passed. Yet its residue clung to her in ways she could not wash away. Days later, a rumor reached the camp that the war in Europe was turning, that the Allies were advancing faster than expected. The women whispered of surrender, of uncertainty, of home. But when Liselott heard the news, she felt only a slow, unfamiliar ache, not relief, not fear, something in between. What would home mean now, after all this? How could she explain to anyone, even to her mother, that captivity had not only confined her body, but loosened her mind? That a bar of chocolate had shifted her understanding of the world more than any speech, any victory, any loss? That night, as the lights dimmed, Marta whispered across the darkness, "When you write again, what will you tell her?" Liselotte turned toward the voice, eyes open in the dark. "The truth," she said. "What truth?" "That the enemy remembered we were human." The words lingered in the air between them, trembling, unresolvable, like the echo of something both shameful and holy. Hamburg, winter 1953, 8 years after the end of the war. The city had been rebuilt, but the new walls still smelled faintly of ash when it rained. The trams clattered again through streets that had once been bone and rubble. Shop windows glittered where once only glass dust lay. Life had resumed, carefully, industriously, but beneath its rhythm ran a silence that no reconstruction could fill. Lieselotte Weber lived in a modest flat near the Ulster, overlooking the narrow canal where thin sheets of ice formed each night. She was 32 now, a clerk in a shipping office, her handwriting as neat as ever. The war had folded itself into the background of her days, not forgotten, only filed away, like a document you dare not discard, yet no longer have reason to open. On her kitchen shelf, above the jars of coffee and sugar, stood an old tin box. The paint on its lid, once a bright cherry red, had faded to a dull rust colour. Inside were her wartime letters, yellowed at the edges, her prisoner's identity card, and between them a single piece of paper so fragile it looked translucent, the chocolate wrapper. Every December, without fully deciding to, Lieselotte took the box down, sat at her small table, and unfolded the wrapper again. The paper had softened with years, its creases like veins on an aging hand. The faint scent of cocoa had long vanished, but the memory it carried did not require smell. That Christmas night in America had never left her. It had become less an event than a point of orientation, something her life bent around, quietly, like a compass needle that never quite stilled. Her daughter Anna, 6 years old and curious about everything, entered the kitchen that evening, dragging her small wool slippers against the floor. "Mama, what is that?" she asked, peering over the edge of the table. Lieselotte smiled faintly. "A piece of paper," she said. "It looks old." "It is." Anna climbed onto her chair and reached for it. "Can I touch it?" Lieselotte hesitated, then nodded. The girl's fingers brushed the surface, lightly, reverently, without understanding. "Is it from the war?" she asked. Children of her generation said the war the way one might speak of a bad dream belonging to someone else. "Yes," Lieselotte said. "Did someone give it to you?" "Yes." "Who?" Lieselotte folded the paper back along its worn seams. "A stranger," she said. The answer seemed to satisfy the child, who soon ran off to her room, the sound of her small footsteps echoing like punctuation marks down the hallway. Lieselotte remained seated, her hands resting on the closed wrapper. Outside, the evening had darkened. Snow began to fall, slow, deliberate flakes that caught in the streetlights. For a moment, the scene through the window resembled another winter, another silence. She could almost hear again the muffled laughter from the barracks, feel the faint heat of the stove, smell the soap and starch. She wondered what had become of the others. Marta, with her trembling hands, the red-haired supervisor, the guard who had wished them good night, the chaplain. Did any of them remember that night, or had it dissolved, as most mercies do, into the dust of ordinary life? Sometimes, when she thought of it too long, she felt embarrassed that her most enduring memory of the war was not of violence or hunger or fear, but of sweetness. But then she would remind herself, it was not the chocolate itself that had mattered, but the contradiction it carried, the way it had made the world unstable, even for a breath, proving that cruelty and kindness could coexist, that enemies could enact gentleness, that nothing human was ever pure. In her diary from those years, she had written once, "Goodness, when it comes from an unexpected hand, leaves a bruise that never fades." She had not understood what she meant at the time. Now she did. The chocolate had not changed the war. It had only changed her. And perhaps that was all history ever truly was. Not great shifts in borders, but the small collisions between strangers, the moments when one life brushed another and left a mark that refused to disappear. She rose, placed the wrapper back into its tin, and set it on the shelf. The clock on the wall ticked, precise, indifferent, alive. At the window, The snow thickened. A tram bell rang faintly across the city, its tone pure and solitary. Liselotte pressed her hand to the glass and felt the cold gather in her palm. Somewhere, across the distance of memory, a younger version of herself sat in a wooden barrack in Iowa, eyes closed, tasting sweetness for the first time in years. The image was faint now, blurred by time, but its warmth endured, not as nostalgia, but as truth. She whispered into the quiet room, "Thank you." To whom, she did not know. Perhaps to that nameless sergeant, or to the nurse with red hair, or to the moment itself, suspended forever between guilt and grace. Then she turned off the light. The apartment filled with darkness, but it was a different kind of dark, not the kind that hides, but the kind that forgives. And as the snow fell outside, slow, soundless, absolute, the camera of memory would linger, one last time, on the faint outline of the wrapper resting in its tin, a small, weightless thing, proof that even in captivity, humanity had remembered itself, proof that mercy, once given, never truly stops traveling.